My dad mocked my business degrees and called me an unstable dreamer, so I walked away. 2 years later, I'm the CEO of a $100 million empire that just took their biggest contract. When the story hit national TV, they were stunned, but the real silence came when I walked in. I used to think that if I worked hard enough, they'd eventually take me seriously, not just as the youngest, not just as the daughter, but as someone who could lead. My name is Alyssa Rowan, and if you've ever lived in Chicago or followed real estate news, you've probably heard of Rowan Developments. For decades, it was one of the most powerful construction and development firms in the Midwest. Sleek high-rises, sprawling residential communities, polished ad campaigns, it all carried the Rowan stamp. What you probably don't know is that I was never meant to be part of it. Not really. I grew up in a world of boardrooms, blueprints, and business deals. My father, Patrick Rowan, ran the company like a kingdom, and my older brother Daniel was the heir. My younger sister Elena? She was the favorite, charming, clever, and always smiling just enough to stay above suspicion.
Me?
I was the one they handed coffee to during meetings. The one they let sit in, but never speak. Even after I earned a dual degree in business and environmental engineering, top of my class, scholarships, internships, I was still just the kid sister trailing behind. At 24, I was managing logistics for a major city project that had gone sideways. It was supposed to be a clean energy complex with commercial and residential components, but delays, budget errors, and a legal dispute had nearly buried it. I stayed up for nights on end, reviewing contracts, reorganizing teams, and coordinating with city officials. I pulled it back from the edge.
The deal closed.
The project moved forward. The company saved nearly $9 million in penalties. I got a thank you email. That was it. No title change. No raise. Not even my name on the internal memo. But I stayed quiet.
I thought maybe they'd see.
Maybe my work would speak loud enough for me. It all shifted during a quarterly board meeting. I remember the room perfectly. Glass walls, oak table, views of the skyline. I came in early, nerves buzzing but excited. I had prepared a detailed proposal. Eco-forward, AI-integrated buildings targeting urban professionals and sustainable investors. The numbers were strong. The projections were backed by real-time market data. A $50 million rollout over 5 years, starting with high-density areas transitioning toward energy-efficient zoning. I knew the pitch inside out. I stood at the front of the room and started presenting. Barely 3 slides in, my father waved his hand. "That's enough, Alyssa." I blinked. "I haven't finished." Patrick didn't even look up. "Stick to ideas that fit your role." "What role is that, exactly?" He looked at me then, like I'd just overstepped some invisible boundary. "You're not here to make waves." Daniel leaned back, arms crossed. "We don't run charities here, you know." The room chuckled, except for Uncle Julian. He avoided my eyes. I turned to Elena. She was smirking, twirling a pen between her fingers. That pen used to be mine. A graduation gift from a mentor. I'd left it in the conference room weeks ago. That night, I found out just how deep the betrayal went. I'd gone back to the office to pick up some files I'd left behind. I wasn't trying to spy, I just happened to pass by the conference room. I heard voices. "She actually thought they'd go for it," Elena said, laughing. "Unbelievable," Daniel replied. "She doesn't get it. This isn't grad school." Then silence. Then Elena again, quieter this time, but sharper. "I sent it to Cadence. Let them have a look. Might as well make use of her homework." I froze. Cadence Partners was a rival firm, and Elena had leaked my proposal. My idea. My data. The whole damn plan. I walked out of the building that night numb. My breath fogged the air as I stood on the sidewalk outside Rowan Tower, the family name glowing in steel above me like a crown I'd never wear. And something inside me shifted. They weren't going to let me lead. Not ever. I wasn't part of the club. I wasn't the son. I wasn't the charming middle child. I was just the one they kept in the background. So I left. I didn't announce it. I didn't send a farewell email. I packed up my small office, signed a lease for a loft in West Loop above a jazz bar, and started over. I had $38,000 in savings, a laptop, and years of strategy buried inside me. I named my company Lyra Projects, after the faint star you can barely see with the naked eye, but when it shines, it burns quietly, steadily, stronger than you'd expect. I wanted to build something different. Not just green buildings, but smart spaces, homes that adapted to their owners, offices that learned energy patterns, structures designed with both beauty and logic. It wasn't easy. I worked 16-hour days. I ate canned soup, negotiated contracts from a couch with springs poking through, and almost quit 5 times in the first 6 months. I borrowed $75,000 from a former classmate who'd made it big in fintech. He believed in the idea. I hired a freelance architect who had been laid off from Rowan Developments. I pitched to small firms, independent contractors, homeowners with eco-conscious goals. Most said no, but a few said yes. And every yes became a brick. Quietly, steadily, Lyra began to rise. I kept it all under wraps. No interviews. No photos. Just work. I didn't want the Rowans to see me coming. I didn't need them to know. Not yet. Because one day they would. The first real turning point came just under 2 years after I walked away. It was a gray Tuesday morning, the kind that makes Chicago feel heavier somehow. I was at the Lyra office. Well, what we called an office. It was really just a converted storage room above the bar, but it was mine. That morning, I got an email from the city. We'd won the bid for a $15 million green housing contract in Bronzeville. I blinked, reread it, and then just sat there, not saying anything. It didn't even feel real. That bid had been expected to go to Rowan Developments. It was their kind of project, their territory. But Lyra's plan was leaner, smarter, and more flexible. We offered modular design, smart temperature control systems, and 32% lower projected energy costs across the first 3 years. I pitched the idea myself, sitting in front of a skeptical panel in a blazer that still had the tag tucked under the sleeve. I walked out thinking they'd pass. But they hadn't. That win was more than a contract. It was a signal that we were no longer invisible. And still, my family had no clue. That became a game to me, watching them from a distance. I followed their press releases, tracked their projects. Rowan Developments was starting to show cracks. Delayed completions. Sloppy permit issues. Overpriced concepts. It wasn't all their fault, but they were too big and too proud to pivot. Meanwhile, Lyra was small, sharp, and fast. I started reaching out to people I used to work with, quietly, of course. A project manager who had been passed over for promotion 3 times. A procurement specialist who handled budgets better than the finance team. A junior architect whose ideas were always too modern for Rowan's taste. One by one, they joined Lyra. And with each one, we grew stronger. Then came the article. I never meant for it to happen like that. A journalist I'd met at a networking event reached out. She said she was writing a feature on women in sustainable architecture and asked for an interview. I said yes. We talked about vision, efficiency, why design shouldn't come at the cost of the planet. I never mentioned my family, never brought up the Rowans. But she did the digging. The article dropped on a Monday morning. The ghost CEO who dethroned Rowan Developments. Meet Alyssa Rowan. My phone exploded. Texts, emails, LinkedIn requests, investors wanting in, former professors congratulating me, and then the silence from them, from the people who once told me I didn't belong. I didn't respond to any of it for the first few hours. I sat at my desk, staring at my name under that headline. It was surreal. It felt like standing in the eye of a storm that had been coming for years. But the fallout was real. Elena was accused internally of leaking company information, my original pitch to Cadence, the one she stole. Apparently, someone from Cadence had come forward anonymously after the article ran. My father's team tried to bury the story, but it spread. Deals started to fall through. Longtime clients pulled back. They couldn't trust a company with so much internal chaos. I wasn't just their competition anymore. I was their reckoning. The week after the article dropped, we secured another contract, this time with a boutique hotel chain expanding into eco-resorts. A $21 million deal. And once again, Rowan Developments had been on the shortlist. They didn't get a call back. I remember sitting at a rooftop restaurant with my assistant, Jamie, going over expansion plans when she got a notification on her phone. Alyssa, she said, eyes wide. Your name just trended on Twitter.
Why?
She turned the screen to me. A split-screen photo. One side was a Rowan development site with a project delayed banner. The other side was a Lyra rendering, modern and glowing. Caption: Guess who's not the underdog anymore? I almost laughed, but I didn't feel like celebrating. Not yet, because I knew what was coming. The family would find a way to reach out. And I was right. 3 weeks later, a cream-colored envelope landed on my desk. The seal was unmistakable. Rowan family reunion. Same location. Same estate. No note. No apology. Just a time and date. I stared at it for a long time. 4 years ago, I walked out of that house with a broken heart and a suitcase. Now they were asking me to walk back in. Jamie looked at the envelope. Are you going?
Of course, I said.
Not for them.
For me.
That Saturday, I pulled into the circular drive in a deep blue electric Maserati. I hadn't rented it to show off. I bought it 2 months earlier after our third investment round closed. The car was silent, elegant. It didn't need to roar to make its presence known. The estate looked the same. Impeccable landscaping. Imported tiles. Custom woodwork. I knew because I had helped design part of it when I was in college. Back when they thought I was still trying to prove myself. I stepped out, wearing a simple ivory suit. No flashy brands. No jewelry. Just poise. That kind of quiet strength they never understood. Inside, the room went silent. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Elena froze mid-sentence. Daniel's mouth actually dropped open. My father stood near the fireplace, older than I remembered, his hand clenched around a glass he hadn't sipped from. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just walked in like I owned the floor. Because in a way I did. They had written me off. And I had become the story they now couldn't escape. I didn't stay in the main room long. The air was thick. Awkward smiles, half-hearted greetings, and whispers that stopped when I walked by. I could feel their eyes on me, but no one said anything. Not right away. I moved through the house, like a ghost they didn't know how to acknowledge. Except now, I was no longer haunting the past. I had become something they couldn't ignore. I stepped out onto the back patio where the garden opened up into a wide, manicured lawn. That's where I saw him, my father, Patrick Rowan, standing with his back to me, staring out across the land like he was trying to figure out how everything had slipped from his hands. He heard my footsteps and turned slowly. For a moment, we just looked at each other. You came, he said finally. His voice was softer than I remembered. Tired. I did, I said. He studied me, maybe searching for a version of me he once knew. But I wasn't her anymore. You've made quite a name for yourself. I didn't answer that. I just watched him. There was a pause, long enough to make it clear he didn't know how to start. Then he sighed and looked down at the ground. The firm's struggling, he said. We've lost key accounts. The city pulled back on their next project, our numbers are. You don't need to explain, I said. I read the article. He looked up sharply, but I wasn't trying to throw it in his face. Not exactly. We could use someone with your mind, he said. Your vision. Your instincts. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I remembered his words too clearly. You told me I didn't have instinct, I said quietly. You said I was emotional, that I cared too much. I may have been wrong, he said. His voice cracked just slightly, like saying it hurt more than he expected. That should have meant something. But it didn't. Not anymore. I didn't come here to rescue anyone, I said. I came for closure. He straightened, caught off guard. I stepped forward just a little. You let them laugh at me, I said. You let them dismiss me, mock me, and you didn't say a word. Even when you knew what I was capable of. I didn't know. You did, I said more firmly. You just didn't care. He opened his mouth to speak, but I kept going. You told me I was never the smart one. That I just worked harder to compensate. You said ideas weren't power. But look around. Who has the power now?
He didn't speak.
I built something without you. While you ignored me, I was building. While you doubted me, I was becoming everything you said I couldn't be. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me at all. And that finally felt like a victory. I turned to leave. But before I walked away, I looked back over my shoulder. You were right about one thing, I said. I'm not like you. And thank God for that. Back inside, the atmosphere hadn't shifted much, but the people had. Dana was talking to a distant cousin with a forced smile. Elena stood near the hallway, sipping wine and pretending to scroll her phone, but her eyes kept darting toward me. I didn't stop to talk to either of them. But then Elena stepped in front of me. You've made your point, she said quietly. No need to gloat. I'm not gloating, I replied. But if I was, I'd have earned it. She huffed a laugh, but there was no humor in it. You used us, she snapped. You used the family name to build your image. No, I said. I buried it. And then I made something better. You stole our people. They weren't yours, I said simply. They were just waiting for a place where they were seen. She looked like she wanted to say more, maybe throw another jab, but she stopped herself. I didn't wait. I walked past her like I had nothing to prove, because I didn't. Before I left, I passed by my Uncle Julian. He was standing by the fireplace, holding a glass, and for the first time in years, he looked directly at me. I always knew you had it in you, he said. You could have said something, I replied. I should have, he admitted. But I was afraid. I nodded once. I wasn't. Outside, the sky had begun to turn a deeper shade of blue, the kind that comes right before the first stars appear. I slid into the driver's seat of my car and sat there for a moment, staring at the house. The same house that once felt like a cage now looked small, like a museum of outdated ideas, polished on the outside but crumbling where it mattered. I didn't feel sadness. Not anymore. What I felt was clarity. I had come full circle, not to be accepted, but to close the door they kept locked for years. I didn't want their approval. I didn't want their praise. What I wanted, what I had always wanted, was to build something that couldn't be taken away from me. And now I had. A few days after the reunion, I was back in the Lyra office, our new office, not the old storage room above the jazz bar. This one was on the 16th floor of a glass building overlooking downtown Chicago.
Clean lines.
Open space. Natural light. We designed it ourselves, every inch built with intention, the way Rowan Developments never allowed me to build anything real. I was reviewing a proposal for a sustainable smart community outside Denver when Jamie burst through the door, her eyes huge. You need to see this, she said, barely catching her breath. She handed me a tablet, already pulled up to a news article. The headline hit like a bell. Rowan Developments faces legal action over failed luxury tower project. I read the first few lines in silence. The project had gone over budget by $9.2 million. Delays, design flaws, missed inspections. And to make it worse, whistleblowers had come forward from inside the company, claiming poor leadership and unethical internal politics. I closed the tablet and leaned back in my chair. I wasn't surprised. Not anymore. Patrick Rowan had spent years convincing the world that only men knew how to build legacies. But the foundation he built was hollow. Too rigid. Too proud. And now it was caving in. I didn't celebrate. I didn't send a message. I didn't even feel angry. Just a quiet sense of confirmation. Later that week, an email landed in my inbox from an investment firm. They wanted to know if Lyra was considering a global expansion. Offices in Europe. Collaborations with international green tech innovators. I smiled. Not because I hadn't dreamed of this, but because now it wasn't just a dream. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee and looked over our growth projections, my phone buzzed again. Jamie walked in just a second later, holding hers. You're not going to believe this, she said. This time it was different. A television network had reached out. They wanted to do a primetime interview, national coverage. A special feature on female founders reshaping real estate, and I would be the closing segment. I hesitated. I'd built Lyra without fanfare, by staying quiet and staying sharp. I hadn't sought the spotlight. I'd always believed the work should speak for itself. But maybe it was time to speak, too. So I agreed. The interview aired 3 days later. The studio lights were bright, the stage polished. I wore a navy suit, nothing flashy, just clean, crisp confidence. The host introduced me with a brief recap of my rise, then smiled. "You've become a symbol for something bigger," she said. "A woman building not just buildings, but a movement." I smiled politely. That wasn't the plan. At first, I just wanted a seat at the table. "And when they didn't give you one?" "I built my own," I said. She leaned forward. "Is it true your father is Patrick Rowan of Rowan Developments?" "Yes." "Why hide it?" "I didn't," I replied. "I just stopped apologizing for not being welcome." The audience clapped. But I wasn't performing. I was just telling the truth. We talked about my early days, the nights I spent drafting proposals alone, the team that believed in me before the world did. I spoke about how design should be inclusive, how sustainability and technology weren't extras, they were essentials. Before we ended, the host asked one last question. "If you could say one thing to the people who once dismissed you, what would it be?" I thought about that for a second. Then I looked into the camera and said, "Thank you." Because if they hadn't closed their doors, I never would have opened my own. When the segment aired, our website crashed from the traffic. We got over 400 partnership inquiries in 48 hours. Our app downloads doubled. Our internal servers pinged with interest from municipalities, universities, and even celebrities. But the message that stayed with me wasn't from a stranger. It was from my mother. Just one line. "Your father saw the interview. He hasn't spoken in hours." I stared at it for a long time. Not out of guilt, not out of pride, but because somewhere deep down, a part of me had once longed for his approval. I used to think it would fix something inside me if he just said, "Well done." But now I realized I didn't need it. His silence wasn't a wound anymore.
It was just a fact.
The world finally knew my name. Not the daughter. Not the forgotten one. Not the girl who brought coffee to board meetings. Alyssa Rowan, founder of Lyra Projects,
CEO.
Builder of futures. And still I wasn't done. Because there were others out there, women with voices they'd been told were too much. Innovators labeled as emotional. Visionaries dismissed as dreamers. I wanted to make sure they didn't have to claw their way through shadows to be seen. A few months later, we launched the Lyra Initiative, an accelerator for young women in architecture, design, and green tech. We offered mentorship, seed funding, and most importantly, a platform. The kind I never had. The kind I would have given anything for. We held our first summit in Chicago, in the same district where Rowan Developments once dominated. This time, the keynote speaker wasn't a man in a tailored gray suit. It was me. I looked out over a crowd of hundreds, students, professionals, founders, and saw in them a reflection of who I'd once been, and who I would have never become if they hadn't told me no. Now I build for them. I lead for them. I rise for them. Because I know what it's like to be underestimated. I know what it's like to be betrayed, erased, ignored. But I also know what happens when you stop waiting for permission. You don't just rise. You rise on your own terms. And the world, no matter how long it takes, can't help but look up.